Before tonight's story begins, I need to warn you. What you are about to hear is based on a terrifying encounter that happened on a remote mountain highway, a place where drivers have reported strange sightings for years. Some people say these stories are just legends. Others believe something still waits in the darkness. If you ever find yourself alone on an empty road after midnight, and someone asks for a ride, you might want to think twice. Turn off the lights, get comfortable, and let's begin. In the autumn of 2024, Daniel Carter had been driving trucks across northern Scotland for more than 20 years. Long, lonely roads had become a normal part of his life. Storms, fog, snow, nothing on the road surprised him anymore. At least that was what he believed, until one night changed everything. The route he was taking that evening crossed a remote section of mountain road known locally as Blackthorn Pass. During the day, the area looked beautiful. Rolling hills, dense forests, and endless valleys stretching toward the horizon. But at night it became a completely different place. Most drivers avoided the road after midnight, especially during bad weather. Over the years, Daniel had heard dozens of strange stories about Blackthorn Pass. Stories about unexplained accidents, disappearing travelers, and people who claimed they saw someone standing beside the road where nobody should have been. Daniel never believed any of it. Ghost stories were something bored drivers created to stay awake. Nothing more. That night, heavy rain hammered against the windshield. The sky was completely black, and visibility was terrible. The clock on the dashboard showed 1:40 a.m. Daniel was transporting construction materials to a town nearly 3 hours away. The road ahead was empty. Not a single vehicle had passed him in over 30 minutes. Only darkness surrounded him. As he rounded a sharp bend, something suddenly appeared in the headlights. Daniel immediately eased off the accelerator. Standing beside the road was a young woman. She looked to be in her early 20s. A dark red shawl covered most of her body. Her long hair hung wet against her shoulders, and despite the freezing weather, she wasn't wearing any shoes. The woman slowly raised one hand, asking for a ride. Daniel stared at her in disbelief. Nobody walked this road at this hour, especially during a storm. For a moment he considered driving past. Every story he had ever heard about Blackthorn Pass flashed through his mind. But then he looked again. The woman appeared exhausted. She was shivering badly, and she looked completely helpless. Daniel sighed, then pressed the brakes. The truck rolled to a stop. Rain continued pouring outside. The woman opened the passenger door and climbed inside. The moment she sat down, Daniel noticed something strange. A powerful smell of wet earth filled the cab. It was strong enough to make him wrinkle his nose. He assumed it came from her soaked clothes. Trying to break the silence, he asked, "Where are you headed?" The woman kept staring forward for several seconds, then finally answered, "Northbridge." Her voice sounded calm, almost emotionless. Daniel nodded. That town was still over an hour away. "What happened out here?" he asked. The woman looked down at her hands. "My car broke down." Daniel glanced through the side mirror. There was no vehicle anywhere behind them, only darkness and rain. Still, her explanation sounded believable enough. He started driving again. For several minutes neither of them spoke. The truck moved deeper into Blackthorn Pass, and with every mile, Daniel felt more uncomfortable. He couldn't explain why. Something about the woman felt wrong. The smell of wet earth continued growing stronger. The temperature inside the cab also seemed to drop. Even though the heater was running, Daniel could suddenly see his own breath. A chill slowly crawled up his spine, and then the woman finally spoke again. "Do you know what happened here?" Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "What do you mean?" The woman slowly turned her head toward the windshield and whispered, "The accident." A strange feeling settled in Daniel's stomach. He had never mentioned any accident, and yet somehow, he already knew exactly what she was talking about. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. The woman continued staring straight ahead. For a few seconds neither of them spoke. Rain pounded against the truck. The wipers moved back and forth across the windshield. Finally, Daniel forced a nervous laugh. "What accident?" The woman answered immediately. "The bus." Daniel froze. Years ago there had been a story about a tour bus that crashed somewhere near Blackthorn Pass. More than 30 people had died. The wreckage had been found at the bottom of a ravine. Some bodies were never recovered. Daniel remembered hearing older drivers talk about it, but he had never mentioned any of that. How did she know what he was thinking? The woman slowly smiled. "They searched for days." Daniel said nothing. "They found most of us." His hands tightened around the steering wheel. A cold feeling spread through his chest. The woman continued, "But not all of us." Daniel looked at the dashboard clock. 1:53 a.m. For some reason the number made him uncomfortable. The road ahead curved through thick forest. No lights, no houses, nothing. Just darkness. The smell of wet earth inside the truck became even stronger. It almost smelled like freshly dug soil. Daniel cracked his window slightly. The smell didn't go away. Instead, it seemed to get worse. Then he noticed something else. The woman's clothes were completely soaked. Water dripped steadily from her sleeves. But strangely, the passenger seat beneath her looked perfectly dry. Daniel glanced again. Not a single wet mark. A shiver ran through his body. The woman suddenly pointed ahead. "Slow down." Daniel looked up. The road was empty. "What is it?" The woman didn't answer. She simply kept pointing. A few moments later, the headlights revealed an old stone marker standing beside the road. The number 13 was painted across its surface. Daniel had driven this route hundreds of times, yet somehow he couldn't remember ever seeing that marker before. As they passed it, the woman let out a quiet laugh. A laugh that sounded completely wrong. Cold, hollow, almost distant. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. He wanted to ask her to leave. He wanted to stop the truck and drive away. But something stopped him. A strange heaviness filled his body, as though his thoughts were becoming slower. Then the woman spoke again. "We're close." "Close to what?" Daniel asked. For the first time, she turned her head toward him, and Daniel nearly slammed on the brakes. Her eyes looked different, far too pale, almost gray, like lifeless glass. She smiled. "We never left." A bolt of fear shot through Daniel. The truck suddenly hit a patch of standing water. The tires slipped. The vehicle swerved violently. Daniel fought the steering wheel. For a terrifying second, he thought the truck was going over the edge. Then the tires caught traction again. The truck straightened. Daniel's heart hammered inside his chest. When he looked toward the passenger seat, the woman was staring directly at him. Not blinking, not moving, just watching. And then she slowly lifted one hand, pointing toward the darkness outside her window. Daniel followed her finger. At first he saw nothing. Then lightning flashed across the sky. And for a split second, he saw dozens of figures standing among the trees, watching the truck, completely motionless. Daniel's entire body went cold. The lightning disappeared. Darkness swallowed the forest once again. For a moment he convinced himself he had imagined it. Maybe the storm had played tricks on his eyes. Maybe fear was getting to him. Then another flash of lightning lit up the mountains. The figures were still there, dozens of them, standing between the trees, watching. None of them moved. None of them reacted. They simply stood there. Daniel immediately looked back at the road. His breathing became heavy. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely hold the steering wheel. The woman beside him began laughing softly. Not loudly, not aggressively, just enough to make the hairs on his neck stand up. Daniel finally found the courage to speak. "Who are you?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she whispered something. At first, he couldn't understand it. Then she repeated it. "We waited." Daniel felt his stomach drop. The temperature inside the truck seemed impossible now. It felt colder than winter. His breath filled the cab like smoke. The windshield slowly began fogging from the inside. Then something appeared in the fog. Finger marks, long streaks, as if dozens of hands had dragged themselves across the glass. Daniel stared in horror. There was nobody else inside the truck, yet more marks appeared, one after another, across the windshield, across the side windows, across the passenger door. The woman slowly leaned closer, still smiling. "We waited for someone to stop." Daniel slammed his foot onto the accelerator. The truck surged forward. The engine roared. He didn't care about the dangerous road anymore. He just wanted to get away. The speed climbed higher. 40, 50, 60 miles per hour. The forest blurred past. Then the woman suddenly spoke again. "Stop here." Daniel ignored her. "Stop here." Her voice sounded deeper this time. Less human, more distant. Almost like several voices speaking together. Daniel kept driving. The woman turned toward him. Slowly. And finally Daniel saw her face clearly. A scream almost escaped his throat. Half of her face looked normal. The other half looked crushed, broken, covered in dried blood. One eye hung lower than the other, and pieces of shattered glass appeared embedded in her skin, like someone who had died in a terrible crash. The woman smiled wider. "We never made it home." Daniel's heart nearly stopped. Then every light inside the truck suddenly went out. The dashboard, the radio, the cabin lights, everything. Only the headlights remained. And what they revealed made Daniel wish they had gone out too. Standing across the road ahead were dozens of people. Men, women, children, all completely still, blocking the entire highway. Their clothes were torn, their faces were damaged, and every single one of them was staring directly at the truck. Daniel screamed and yanked the steering wheel. The truck swerved violently, the tires lost grip, and the vehicle slid toward the edge of the mountain road. Daniel pulled the steering wheel with all his strength. The truck skidded across the wet road. For a terrifying moment he thought he was going over the edge of the mountain. The rear tires slid toward the guardrail. Metal screamed against metal, then somehow the truck straightened. Daniel fought to regain control. His heart was pounding so hard it felt painful. When he finally looked forward again, the road was empty. The figures were gone, every single one of them. Only darkness remained. Rain continued hammering the windshield. Daniel's hands shook uncontrollably. He turned toward the passenger seat. The woman was still there, watching him, smiling. Her crushed face seemed even worse now. Water dripped from her hair, but her clothes still looked impossibly dry. Then she slowly raised one finger, pointing ahead. Daniel followed her gaze. Far in the distance, a faint light glowed through the storm. At first he thought it was another vehicle. Then he realized what it was. A small roadside chapel, one that local drivers often stopped at during long trips. The moment he saw it, the woman stopped smiling. For the first time, her expression changed. She looked angry, very angry. The smell of wet earth inside the truck became overwhelming. Daniel pushed the accelerator harder. The chapel grew closer. The woman began whispering something. At first it sounded like one voice, then two, then dozens. The entire cab filled with overlapping whispers. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but he knew they weren't meant for him. The headlights finally reached the chapel entrance. Daniel slammed on the brakes. The truck came to a violent stop. He jumped out without even turning off the engine. Cold rain soaked him instantly. He ran toward the chapel door. The moment he reached the entrance, every sound disappeared. The whispers, the storm, everything. Silence, complete silence. Daniel slowly turned around. The truck sat alone on the roadside, its headlights shining through the rain. The passenger door was wide open, but the woman was gone. The seat was empty. Daniel stood frozen, trying to process what had happened. Then he noticed something on the passenger seat, a small silver bracelet, one he had never seen before. The bracelet looked old, covered in dirt and rust. Daniel carefully picked it up. The metal felt freezing cold. Later that morning, after finally reaching his destination, he told another truck driver what had happened. The older man listened quietly, then his face turned pale. Without saying a word, he pulled out his phone. After searching for a minute, he showed Daniel an old newspaper article. The article was about a tour bus crash that happened on Blackthorn Pass in 1987. 37 people had died. Daniel's eyes locked onto one of the photographs. Standing beside the wrecked bus was a young woman. A woman wearing a dark red shawl. A woman with the exact same face. And around her wrist was the same silver bracelet now sitting in Daniel's pocket. The article stated that her body was never recovered. To this day, Daniel refuses to drive through Blackthorn Pass after midnight. And whenever another driver asks him why, he always gives the same answer. Because some passengers never reach their destination, and some roads never let the dead leave. So that's the story. If you have a scary or unexplained experience of your own, or know someone who does, feel free to send it to me by email. You'll find my email address in the video description below. Your story could be featured in a future video. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next horror story.